Welcome back to another episode of 22 at the Lips. This is the podcast from EMS providers, such as myself, to EMS providers. Whether you work in the healthcare setting and all encompassing areas that they are, pre-hospital, firefighters, whatever you may be, wilderness explorers, to even the hospital setting and the random bystander who stumbled upon this journey of this podcast. Thank you for joining us. I feel like in EMT school and paramedic school, especially, you have all the things to study. You have your textbooks, you have all the other resources, you have so much to study and memorize and all this stuff. But I feel like a big part of kind of what brings it together is a little bit of that extracurricular, such as podcast. And then there are other books that people write in EMS. And speaking of, it's going to be who our guest is today, but we have Mr. Kelly Grayson, and he's done millions of things. We're going to get into that in a little bit, but he wrote a book. It is called En Route, a paramedic's stories of life, death, and everything in between. And it follows not only his experiences as a brand new EMT through his progression, working as becoming a paramedic and beyond, but he has the ability to weave and portray. He's able to weave and portray the ability that we have as providers in the depth of making connections with our patients and truly just making these impacts beyond what we will know, what we will see in the 15, 20 minutes of interaction that we have with them. His writing style, it is raw, it is honest, and throughout that book and the other ones he's written that he's going to talk about, it'll take you from laughing to asking yourself like a couple of chapters later, like, wait, are you serious? And in some parts, being on the brink of tears. And I'm sorry, not Mr. Grayson. I've been fussed at about that. Kelly, if you also want to talk about your different books, so you have your Perspectives, Volume 1 and 2, you have a bunch of other stuff, but tell me if I get anything wrong or if you want to expound on it. He's got 20 plus years in the field. He's been a field supervisor, an educator, holds several seats in the EMS educational boards in Louisiana, NREMT. He writes for EMS One, which is an excellent source for staying up to date with what is going on in the EMS community, updates, coordinator for Medic Solutions to train the next generation of EMS providers, and past the IMBD of who you are. If you want to tell the people who you are, what you stand for, why you got into this job, the floor is yours, my guy.
I am, you said 20 plus years in EMS, and it occurred to me, I got this from National Registry the other day, 30 continuous of EMS certification. And now, if you don't mind, I'll go off and take my Geritol smoothie and my arthritis medicine and tell some kids to get the hell off my lawn. No, I started in EMS as I was a professional retriever trainer and duck hunting guide. That was my passion, was duck hunting and duck dogs, and that's what I was doing for a living. I had taken over my brother's training kennel and making a living at that, and got burned out on that and decided I needed to do something else. And I had, right after high school, I had spent a couple of years in college goofing off, and I decided to go back to school. Well, I owed humongous student loans and couldn't afford to pay them off. So I said, well, I'm going to have to get a job to pay off some student loans, and I wanted to do it in healthcare. So I went to Delta Washita Technical College to enroll in a licensed practical nursing course. And I got to the registrar, and she said, well, there's an 18-month waiting list for the LPN course. Oh my God. She said, but there's this other course called emergency medical technician that a lot of people like to take while they're waiting for an LPN slot to open up. Why don't you sign up for that? And I did, and within about 2 weeks, I decided, nah, I think I'd rather work on an ambulance and work as an LPN somewhere, and gone on with it after that. I went to work straight out of school for a little mom and pop ambulance service in Farmerville, Louisiana, and they it was a it was a great place to work and a horrible place to work. Uh, it was a great place to work, and it was just a group of dedicated people that were really had all the heart you could wish for, and we had a boss that had his priorities straight: patients, partners, profits, in that order. And he's a great guy to work for and a great guy to help you grow as a provider and eventually as a medic. Horrible businessman. Absolutely horrible businessman. So, we survived for the first year and a half I worked there. I didn't get paid. I was a paid EMT who didn't get paid. But they sent me to paramedic school. I took a accelerated paramedic course at Delta, Washita, and I got my paramedic certification 1 year to the day after I got my EMT certification. I was Louisiana's first zero to hero. At the time, they made you be an EMT on an ALS ambulance for 2 years before you could enroll in paramedic school, and I had a whopping 5 months of experience. But they turned me loose on that, and my didactic was done in 15 weeks, and then did my clinicals. And March 19th of 1993, I became an EMT, and March 19th of 1994, I got the big envelope from National Registry in the mail saying I'd become a paramedic. And I have been inflicting myself on unsuspecting patients ever since.
Oh man. So I never thought about it till I think like right after I got my national registry, like you passed email, kept checking the website hundreds of times. It never really hit me that like y'all had to wait for the envelope. There was no like,
gosh,
here's your
yes.
email, congratulations. I think I would have had an aneurysm.
Yeah.
Absolutely had
You
I would have
kids
been.
these days with your email and your websites and your electronic testing. In my day, we did it in a Scantron sheet. We put it in an envelope. We mailed it off, and we waited by the mailbox for 6 weeks before we got our results. And by God, we were grateful. Yeah. You knew if you passed or failed by what size the envelope was. If they sent it to you in a regular business size envelope, it was you failed letter. If they sent it to you in a document sized envelope, which we didn't realize at the time was the envelope that you put your Scantron sheet in when you handed it to the proctor. They just when they processed your stuff, they just stuck it in the same envelope, tore the gum wrapper off of it, and sealed it up, and it had your card, your certificate, and your patch in it. And it took about 6 weeks to get it done. I was driving my boss around scouting locations for a new ambulance station, and he had a simple rule that the senior medic or the senior EMT or the higher certification always rode, and the EMT, the lesser certification, always drove. So he was an intermediate at the time, and I was driving him around, and my employee number was 702. I got that employee number because I was working on an ambulance one day, and all our employees' numbers started with 6 if you were a first responder, 7 if you were an EMT, 8 if you were a intermediate, and 9 if you were a paramedic, and 5 if you were a nurse of one flavor or another. So I can't remember what my first employee number was, but one day refurbishing an ambulance that we had bought for $2,500, I was working in the back of the ambulance, putting up some trim strips, and drilled a hole through the wall and the main oxygen cylinder. So
Well,
Instead of a Christmas bonus this year, I got a M cylinder with a 5/16 inch hole drilled through it. And from that day forth at that service, my employee number ended with
oh,
02.
too.
So I was driving along, and radio said headquarters to 902, and I said 702, go ahead. She said, no, correction, that's 902. Your national registry results just came in. We've already called the state and gotten you a temporary permit. Congratulations.
Oh,
So I let out a big whoop, and I pulled over to the side of the road. My boss said, what are you doing? I said, lowest certification drive, biatch. You shuffle
absolutely
over here and
warranted.
chauffeur me around here for a little while.
Look at the gold glitter. No, just kidding. We don't pull
That's
that
right.
lever.
Yeah. Note the cool disco patch.
So, kind of wanting to start off on where I feel like a big part of the impact of the books that you've written. You have a
Uh-huh.
quote that says, "Cure all." No, I'm sorry. You have a quote that says, "Cure sometimes, treat often, comfort always," and that
Yep.
is it is something that I, as much as I can remember, I think about it as much as I can, just because like you've talked about things that people remember, and it's the idea that
Mhm.
not every patient needs the kitchen sink. Just
Yeah.
and what I've told students, just because you can doesn't mean you have to. Should you when it's
Yeah.
warranted? Yes. But sometimes with these patients, it's literally just reassuring them that they're going to be okay. It's not
Mhm.
that um the Meemaw who fell, she has a hip fracture. Like, she doesn't really need
Yeah.
another dose of medication. Just hold her hand. Like, you've given
Yeah.
her enough pain meds, hold her hand and reassure her that, like, everything's gonna be fine. We're working it out. Your parents of your pediatric patients, they don't need a full set of
Mhm.
vitals and stuff like that. They just need you to look them in the eyes and say, I'm taking care of your child. We're doing everything that we can. We're getting them to definitive care. But anyways,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
no, you go ahead, my
I,
guy.
it took, I was the cockiest SOB alive when I graduated from paramedic school. And I did a whole lot of stuff because I could, not because the patient needed it. That whole GCS less than 8 intubate,
Jesus.
I'd look and go, hey, there's a whole wing of the nursing home with people with GCS less than 8.
It's a whole wing.
Hey, all right, just wait till they call me for one of those. And I did a bunch of unnecessary stuff to people, and I justified it by saying overtreat many, undertreat none. But that's, I think that's part of your growth as an EMS provider. You learn when to be aggressive, when not to be aggressive, and that it took me a solid 10 years to realize what my patients valued, as good service was not what I considered good care. There were two differing opinions on what a good ambulance call was, and that was
Yeah.
pretty powerful lesson for me.
And I feel like it goes back to the idea that, like, at the end of your career, when it's all said and done, when you've put the uniform away, you've turned in your badge, the radio's hung up, all that stuff, it's not going to be the times that you remember of doctors patting you on the back or any accolades you may have, whatever it is. Any times you got employee of the year.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's going to be those core moments that you've had with your patients, or had, if you're lucky enough, you've had that patient like contact you, find you, and meet with you and say, like, hey, thank you. Or
Yeah.
I've had it a couple of times. You run into a patient later down the road. I ran into a patient on a completely different call, and they like stop me and they're like, hey, I think you responded to me. And part of me is like, oh, Father HIPAA, no. But also I was like, I couldn't remember. And she was like, no, like you picked me up off the floor, you and your partner, and like y'all just were so nice. I'll never forget that. And I'm like, but it was a lift assist. So I feel like a
Oh,
big part.
I've had that same thing. I was precepting a new medic, and the second day he rode with me, he'd been riding with me for 36 hours. And after 36 hours, he just said, "You don't remember me at all, do you?" And I went,
Should I?
"No, should I?" And he said, "Well, we've met before." And I said, "Really? When was that?" And he said, "Well, I said, where did you used to work?" He said, "No." He said, "I was a patient." "A patient of whose?" And he said, "Well, let's just say, uh, left-sided tension pneumothorax, you decompressed my chest, I had a lacerated kidney, intestinal bleed, and a broken pelvis." And I was like, "Oh my God, that guy had been a rodeo rider, and he'd gotten stomped by a bull, and he was pretty messed up pretty bad. And he decided that he would find a safer line of work, and decided to become a paramedic. And I was one
Oh,
of the medics that took care of him, and did not recognize him, but he said it inspired him enough that he chose EMS as his second career. So it's pretty cool. That was a red letter day way back then.
absolutely. Because even just like I tell my partners and I tell other people, we go on all of these patients. We have all of these calls, and it feels like, there's sometimes it feels like everybody calls 911, but for some of these people, I would say most of them, as it should be, but they call 911 maybe once in their entire life. And when you show up, it may be the worst day of their entire existence. It may be the
Yep.
worst day, or it may not be. But when you walk in, you not only represent yourself and the image that you want to be, but you
The whole
represent your
profession.
entire, exactly, your entire profession. You're a walking billboard for your agency. So, like, in these impacts, you can be, because you hear about people that are like, oh yeah, EMS, they're so mean. And then like, that's that provider, and shame on you for being that provider that,
Yeah.
anyways. So I want to bring up the book before I go off on a whole
Okay.
tangent. But you have in your volume 1 perspectives book, talking about, so this is from a nurse in the ER, but she's talking about these calls that it's in like these situations and these patients that it's not just another one, but sometimes she calls them the spillovers, the quote take homes, and these patients that don't really fit neatly into a box. And in these, there, she says there's no defensive mechanism to keep you in a safe, unaffected little bubble. And maybe that's a good thing, because segue, you hear, and we have these calls that affect us. We have this mental baggage that goes with this. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes calls just don't affect us. They just rub off. And sometimes they do. And in this case, she's saying maybe your heart needs to break for strangers every now and then to keep the passion for the profession alive. And then I'm going to go to the next page. She says, some people need more than just modern medicine. They need fellow humanly love, understanding, and reassurance. The wall of armor you build around yourself becomes an echo chamber of resentment and moral distress, and that will break you down faster than any singular event ever could. It turns out for this patient she was talking about, this patient was abused by her husband. They worked with her, eventually got her the help she needed, but she says, it turns out I just needed to feel. This woman and all of her hurt reminds me that I'm not in this for the glory or the saves or the stories. I'm in this, after all, to help somebody. And
Yeah.
like I always say, it is so cheesy to say and to hear,
Uh-huh.
but at the core of why we get into this job, why we do what we do, it's not, I mean, for some people it may be, but 9 times out of 10, it's not. It's not for all the medications we can push and to throw down tubes from down the hallway and to defibrillate everybody. It's because we see that there are people that are hurting. And whether it's because we have felt that type of hurt or because we know how to alleviate it, we've been in their shoes, we can be the person that stands in that gap and we can help
Yeah.
them, because in some cases we've been that patient or we understand that type of pain. Maybe it's not physical, but
Hmm.
anyways.
People that have never been in this profession or in healthcare, uh, they say, "Oh, I don't know if I could do what you do," and all the blood and all the horrible things you see, and that's like, what's the worst thing you've ever thing in EMS, the paycheck.
Right.
Um, but they don't understand that that's not what gets you. That's not what gets you at all. You know, you're too busy working to notice the blood and the trauma. You got a job to do. It's afterwards when the shake sets in. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is when you look back over your career and you experience a similar call later in your career and it doesn't affect you and
Mhm.
you can't remember a time when it did. And you go, what's happened to me? You know, that this should bother any normal person. I mean, it's great that I have coping mechanisms. I thought I had coping mechanisms. I didn't. I became one very, very angry, short-tempered dude that never let it show on the ambulance, but I would go home and take it out on my girlfriend and just not, I mean, not be abusive or anything,
Right.
just not be a pleasant person to be around. And there was a quote in a Tom Clancy novel that stuck with me for years. It said the hardest part about losing your soul is remembering a time when you had one. You know, and when you go back and that's one of the things I've always enjoyed about working with brand spanking new EMTs. A lot of people get a new rookie and they're like, oh Jesus Christ, I gotta break in another rookie. And I am not like that at all. Give me a rookie anytime because there's something, you know, mentally and emotionally draining about um, looking back at your career or looking back and seeing that sparky new rookie, the adrenaline junkie who's just everything is a new experience, and you don't recognize yourself in that person anymore. It's just that's like, what the hell happened to me? I used to be that guy. What happened to me to make me this crusty old bastard that I am now? So that's why I always liked working with the new EMTs because um, you know, I could season them up, but they remind me of the joy we used to take in this profession and help me reconnect to it. So
And
made it a lot of uh, longer career for me, just getting rejuvenated by watching EMS through the rookie's eyes every now and then.
and it's so much of that, like, because you have those providers that they join this field because of the adrenaline rush and stuff like
Yep.
that. But it if you're in it for that, that's gonna burn you out real quick because it's
Yep.
not all adrenaline. And for me, like
Yeah.
when I found the Perspectives book, it was at a time I was in the cusp of paramedic school. And I mean, you're learning about all this cool stuff and you're hearing, you have all these different scenarios. And I was that person because I was an EMT for 6 months. And then I got right into paramedic school. So
Yeah.
I'm in the cusp of like everything is still brand new and I'm building on top of that. And
Yeah.
now like I'm running through scenarios of like intubating people in their cars and all this stuff. And like, no, I'm not actually. But in my mind, I'm like, this is being a paramedic. And
Yeah.
so
I'm gonna climb up on the hood, pull the windshield out of the way, and do a tomahawk intubation while they're pinned behind their steering wheel.
no, ma'am, you are not. So so like in the cusp of that, and then the realization hitting me of like this job is not always that. You have your once in a lifetime calls, you have your black cloud weeks, but it's not that. So it's also that imposter syndrome that I still face to this day of like the heaviness and the weight of this patient's life is in your hands, depending on, in some cases, what you do or you do not do. So I was in the middle of all of that, and I found this book, and I'm like, man, I don't know. And so I read it, and I got through the whole book, and like you're talking about, you can feel that perspective, the
Yeah.
honest brutality of this job. And then I read the last chapter, and I was sitting around a group of people, and I had to like just like walk out, act like I'm taking a phone call. That last chapter, dude, it hit me not in that exact way, but woo. Sometimes I'll like recommend the book to somebody, and if they're reading it, they'll go through and like tell me about a couple of things. I'm like, oh yeah, and then they'll be like, well, the last chapter. I'm like, no friend. So No. So, I do want to ask, like,
Sure.
I know some of the book, it's like, these funny stories. These, like I talked about, you have that one where y'all have a code and you throw on the AED and it pops the chihuahua. Like, I think that's hilarious. I hate chihuahuas. But it's also you're showing the actual trauma and horrible things about this
Mhm.
field. And, like we have those calls that either in the fresh moment, like you can't talk about them, or it takes a while to resolve them. And that's not mental
Mhm.
weakness, that's reality, because we are put
Yeah.
in situations that 99 of people percent of people will never see in their life. And realistically, some of
Yeah.
the stuff nobody should ever see. But anyways,
Yeah.
um, so you're able to take these moments and write about it.
Yeah.
And like hats off to you, man. But was there like a key moment where you decided in your career you're going to take this collection of stuff, and I'm sure there's millions of other things in between, from when you were the EMT on your first call, you didn't know how to spike a
Uh-huh.
bag,
Yeah.
to where you
What do I throw it
progressed.
down on the floor of the ambulance, do a funky dance or something, you know? Uh, do the, do the Dougie or whatever, or the gritty or whatever it is that
Whatever
they're
these kids are doing these
was the
days.
dance this just recently. But yeah, I had no freaking idea. I learned on my very first ambulance call, when a patient has been seizing, it's always good to pick up the head end because you get pee on you when you pick up the other end.
Mhm.
And my boss knew that, help me learn that lesson. He said, "You get that end," and I picked it up, pee all over me. But I don't know that there was a specific call that just spurred me to do this. What it was cathartic. It was um I've always been a natural storyteller and have an elephant's memory. I remember things and that stick, and I can throw it into a story. But I came home from teaching an EMT class in South Louisiana, and I was living in West Monroe at the time, and I was teaching an EMT refresher class in Westlake, and came back and opened the front door, and half my stuff was gone. And I thought, oh my God, I've been burglarized. Then I saw the note, the Dear Kelly note, on the coffee table, and I was absolutely flabbergasted. I was so clueless and checked out. I was burned out during the time, and depressed, and didn't recognize it for what it was. I do now. The in retrospect, it was pretty clear, but I was just so wrapped up in my own depression that I wasn't a good husband or partner, and my wife left me, just left, and that was the first clue that I had that she was unhappy. The very first clue. So I spent a couple of weeks. I was working for AMR in Monroe at the time, and I spent the first couple of weeks afterwards trying very, very hard to be a fall down drunk. And then I found out who she had left me for, and that they'd had something going on. And I tried very hard to be a murderer, and, because I was going to kill him. Um, uh, we joke later that I know what his head looks like through a rifle scope. Uh, I was in a dark, dark, dark place.
Yeah.
But one day we were doing system status management. You sit on a street corner all night long when you're in between calls, and I was going nuts. So I hauled out my laptop and I started writing a story about a fatality wreck that I had, that kind of bugged me at the time, and wrote that one. And that reminded me of another one, and reminded me of another one. And after about 2 weeks of that, my partner said, "What in the hell have you been writing over there all this time?" And I said, "It's just nothing, nothing." And she's like, "Oh no, what have you been writing?" She snatched my laptop away from me. And then I just nervously chewed my lip while she wore out the scroll wheel on my laptop. And she handed it back. She said, this is good. You should get this published. And I went, no. And she said, no, you really should. So thinking, and I sent it to a friend I trust who was a legend in EMS. He was one of R. Adams Cowley's first EMTs, one of the first EMTs ever. And he owned an EMS fulfillment house, emsbooks.com. He just all sorts of stuff, books and t-shirts and gear, just name your whacker catalog, and he had it in it. And I sent it off to him, said, Lou, what do you think? And he sent me a contract. I didn't know that he had started his own publishing house. And he sent me back a publishing contract, and it was a doozy. It was hey, we'll split everything 50-50. I'll publish it, promote it, and you get you get 50% of the royalties. I'll take the other 50%, which you will not get from any major publisher these days.
No.
You're lucky if you get 12%, and some really big names get 15, but you're not gonna make a lot of money as a traditionally published author these days. So that book was called Life, Death, and Everything in Between, and it was out for 6 months or so, and I started writing a blog to kind of polish my writing craft and get better at writing and kind of use it as a trial balloon for new stories and stuff. And the blog became a day in the life of an ambulance driver. And it became one of the more popular EMS blogs on the web, if not the most popular back when blogs were big. I was, getting 2,000 or 3,000 hits a day and that sort of thing. And I would, a publisher or an editor with a division of Prentice Hall, Kaplan Press, came and emailed me and said, hey, I like your writing style. Have you ever considered writing a book? And I said, well, actually, I have a book already published. And he said, oh, okay, well, thanks for responding to me anyway. Well, a week later, he emails me back and says, I bought a copy of your book. We really like it. We'd like to publish it. How ironclad is your contract with your current publisher? And I said, well, it's not ironclad at all. In fact, we anticipated something like this happening. Lou said, if we get you noticed by the big boys, I'm happy to let you go. This deserves to be read and heard. So they took the book, published it, and it sold fairly well, got good reviews. They butchered it. They took a bunch of my connecting material out of it, and it read like a bunch of disconnected short stories rather than a flowing narrative. So, and then they shut down that division of Kaplan Press, and they orphaned me with no sales support, nothing. And after a couple more years, they remaindered the rest of my books and reverted the rights back to me. And when the rights reverted back to me, I've republished it with the deleted material restored and put it back in the way I wanted it to be done. And that book was en route. And it was the first 10 years of my EMS career, and it was 10 years of Kelly the cocky paramedic. I was a very, very cocky, very arrogant, very profane at times paramedic back then. But it was, the EMS war story, hey, no shit, there I was, and those kind of stories. All of those stories happened. They actually happened. My boss did defibrillated Chihuahua and ricocheted that little sucker across the room. I did work a EMS call where 2 people were killed by a rooster ostrich, and did all those things. But the focus in that first book was about the calls. Hey, here's about this cool call I ran, and my focus changed over my career. So the next book is more about the relationships and the people I met rather than the particular calls I ran. But
Mhm.
I started that book because I was recently separated and terribly depressed and trying to keep my sanity. So I needed something to take my mind off of things. So I selected the best calls from the beginning of my career that had not necessarily happy endings, but back when I liked myself as a person, uh, and and stopped it right there before the bad stuff happened. So
And it's there are different parts that, like, even though, I mean, that was, not exactly yesterday, but, it's been a minute, but, you can still, like, as a provider who
mhm,
may not have been in your exact shoes, you can still relate to it. And one of the quotes that, even as, like, I've gone through and I've read different parts of it kind of over, just because, like,
mhm,
there's just different things that you can pick apart and, like, feel it. And recently, on one of my calls, I this is the one that, like, it hit different this time that I read it. Um, it was with Miss, I think it's Carlotta. I don't know how to say her name. Yeah.
yeah,
So it says, outside, Carlotta is leaning against the wall smoking. She has stopped crying,
oh,
but I
yeah,
cannot. This one's hard, man. But I
yeah,
cannot face the look I'll see in her eyes. I try to slip by her as if I hadn't seen her, but I feel her hand on my arm as I walk past, and she gently turns, I'm sorry, turns me to face her. I just stand there, afraid to say anything. She reaches up and pulls my head down to her shoulder and puts her hand on the back of my head. And she says, "It's okay. You did all you could. I know you did your best." She holds me there for a few seconds longer and then grasps both of my arms, forcing me to meet her gaze. "Really," she says seriously, "thank you." And so, and I'm not going to give away any spoilers, but
yeah,
this one was a call that, like, you had said in, like, a reflection, like, you shouldn't have been, I mean, your words, not mine, but you shouldn't have been so arrogant to be like, "Oh, I've got this. Oh, I've got this,"
oh
all
yeah,
this stuff.
yeah,
And for me, um, like, my call wasn't like that, but it's that moment of, like, face to face of, like, okay, above all of the responsibilities of a call, being honest with yourself and admitting
yeah,
when something was over your head. The moments
yeah,
when you, as the provider, you have to understand that though you have your training and education experience, you can't save everyone. Then what I try to tell students is, like, when you show up is after the event. It is
yeah,
after the wreck. It is after this, that, and the other. And even though you can do XYZ, you can start
yeah,
the process of doing this, you can push this man, you can do this. What matters and what was evident in that call is that at the end of the call, either the family knows you tried everything and sometimes that's all they want, or you did everything that you could and the outcome was still not what you
yeah,
wanted, but it is what it is. And
yeah,
I I also want to bring up, because, like, the call that I had that was like that, I didn't have a family member that was just like, "Hey, you did what you could." But I had a really good friend of mine that I called and I was crying and I'm like, "Dude, I don't know what I did wrong." And he was like, "Not you." He said, "She caught air and hit the ditch and then hit the tree, and you brought her to the best hospital. They couldn't get her to the OR table fast enough. That's not on you." He's like, "For whatever reason, that thing happened." And he was like, "You
yeah,
did what you could, Alexis. Like, take
mhm,
this and go." And so I don't know, that moment where, like, you have that heaviness, but then the reflection of, like, I
mhm,
did everything I could. But
yep, the
one of your articles I feel like resonates with this, I still have it saved on one of my bookmark tabs on my computer, is the article. It's called "Making Friends with the Ghost."
yep,
Highly recommend you read it. And you refer to the call with the pediatric patient who, and you were honest, they wouldn't have made it because of the time
yeah,
to get to the call, the extent of the trauma, et
yeah,
cetera, and how you had to deal with it. And you wrote, and I read it often, um, just the process of dealing with it. You said, I went back to work the next shift without another headstone in the graveyard because I knew I had done the only things that could have been done and done them well. And I knew that the tears I shed were simply a part of the healing. You do well to approach bad calls in the same way. Do your best and don't be afraid to share your pain with those you love when the best simply isn't good enough. That's the easiest way to make friends with the ghost. And that's part of like the whole push that we have in EMS now is like, oh, it's okay to not be okay. Oh, we have these calls and stuff like that. But it's also in that same mindset, take what you've learned, if you've learned something from it, and move on. And that's what I recently told a group of students, that you can't save everyone, and it's not your job to save anyone. It is your job to be able to, at the end of the call, look yourself in the mirror and say, I did what I could.
Yep. Yep. Carlotta's nephew was my first DWPA call. Uh, DWPA means die with paramedic assistance. And shame will never burn you as hot as when a family member thanks you for killing their loved one. He probably would have died anyway, but I definitely didn't help him. And if I'd have been better prepared and more knowledgeable and less arrogant and cocky, he might be here today. I was not equal to the task that day, and I was not self-aware enough to know that I was not equal to the task. And I went home after that call. I just stared off into the darkness as my partner drove me home, didn't say a word. And when I got back to the station, I went to my bedroom and I turned on the shower, and I got into the shower and I cried myself to sleep until the water got cold. And you wake up after a call like that and you wonder if it's like Robert Frost's poem, two roads diverge in the wood. Which way can you go? Is this the call that breaks you and says, you're not cut out for this? Or is this the call, the wake up call that tells you, and for me, it was a wake up call. It was the one that told me that I need to make sure to do everything I can to make sure my skills and my knowledge match my ego. and it took a while for my skills and knowledge to catch up with my ego, and it's still neck and neck. I'm still cocky, but I'm better. And I realized that this a wise old medic told me one time, there are two rules about EMS. Rule number one, people die. Rule number two, there's not a whole lot we can do about rule number one. Some people are going to die no matter what you do, and you do your best and you move on. I think that's the best part about emotional resilience is don't be afraid of emotions. Nobody, family members, when they come thank you, they don't come up to you in the grocery store and say, hey, you took care of my grandma. Let me tell you what, I never saw anybody tube like you did. You handle a laryngoscope like nobody's business. I mean, my mom had to be a Malampati 4 and a Cormac and Lahane 4, and she has no neck, and her thyromental distance is like that wide. And I didn't think you could conventionally intubate her because she looks like a snowman, but you did it. And hats off to you. They don't say that. No. They say, you were so nice. You stood in the rain and held an umbrella over grandma while you got soaked so she wouldn't get cold, and that sort of thing. And you were kind. Or I remember when my husband died and I cried on my shoulder, and I saw that you cried a little bit too, and that really meant a lot to me. That's the kind of thing that matters. And we're for some reason, we teach people to be so afraid of that. And yeah, you can't break down and be the next patient at the cardiac arrest. No. But there is absolutely nothing wrong with feeling emotion and showing emotion. Just don't let it rule you. And being able to show that emotion is that's how you bend but not break. So.
And then kind of in the same vein of like what we talked about and what you just referred to, the idea that like you come in contact with these patients, but it's also not just the lasting impact we have on them in their health, but like the difference that we make of just being there. And
Yeah.
like with, okay, one of my favorite ones, Miss Clara, the frequent
Oh
flyer
God, that
of the 911 service who would have y'all cookies and stuff like that. Like sign me up for Miss Clara. But um whenever there was a portion where she found out she was super sick and she was going to pass away, and her grandchildren pull up to y'all station with a flatbed full of like furniture and stuff
yeah.
because she
I
just
had that
wanted.
furniture until my ambulance station burned down.
Oh,
Uh, but
but like she
yeah,
wanted
I
y'all to
still think that
have
furniture.
that
Yeah,
furniture. And like, dude, and then kind of in that same vein of like these are people. The one you had talked about, the lady with emphysema from Long Bottom, Louisiana, because change
yeah,
things, but you thought she had the pneumonia, the CHF, all that stuff, and she was gonna die alone in her house. And you wrote this portion. It's a little chilling, but I love it. Um, it's yeah, it's much too late for the firefighters to even attempt to go inside, so they just surround and drown. And later, picking up through the soggy wreckage, they find her in the back bedroom. We bag her up and take her body to the morgue. We don't even know the name of the son, much less how to reach out to him. The morgue attendant is bored and disinterested, directing us to place the bag on an empty table. Perfunctorily copying what little information we have. She's just another piece of meat to him, but we know her name. And it's that reflection that you have of, hey, like this was a person. And I any any call that we have, whether it's a DOA or a cardiac arrest that we don't get back,
yeah,
or even just like dead bodies that we don't even do a 4 lead because it's like, oh, this is too
yeah,
much.
yeah,
I don't write patients' names because that's HIPAA, but I do log it, and I've done it
yeah,
from day one as an EMT, the first one I ever had until I continue it today. I don't know how many there are. I know the next section down is all the ROSCs I've had, all the people I've
yeah,
gotten back, and so anytime we go on a call like that, and if I'm working with someone I knew and I'm like, hey, like, what was her name? Okay. And then I write a little blurb about what the call was. And I've had people ask me, like,
yeah,
what is that? And I explain it, and they're like, that's morbid. But I go back to this, and like I started the list before I read this, but it just kind of solidifies like that is somebody, even if it's
mm-hmm.
homeless Joe that you ran on 100 times and you can't kill a cockroach, but finally some way,
Yeah,
somehow they keeled over. Like at the end of the day, like that was somebody's son, that was somebody's
yep.
brother, that was these people do matter. And
You have to. Someone has to bear witness,
yeah,
and to this person's existence. It can't just be a piece of meat. Problem is sometimes is the bearing witness is emotionally traumatic, and you don't want that name. You definitely don't want that name. You want that memory to go and never come back. And it's not if there's a freaking name attached to it. And Carlotta's nephew, I used a false name in the book, but I remember his name and his date of birth and the day of that call 30 years later. And I had a call at when I worked in South Louisiana when we first met. Uh, there was a fatality on the interstate. A pedestrian crossed the interstate and got hit by an oncoming car, and he was tore up bad. I mean, it was obvious death. All the signs were there, and I wrote him up as a John Doe. And of course, the billing department kicked it back. Because
of course.
we need an address and we need a name of this person. I said, sorry, none available. Well, you can't call who are the police department that work the wreck? Call the state troop. They probably haven't. I said, sorry. Tried to call them, couldn't do it. And we went back and forth with this for several weeks. Uh, and finally, they kicked it to my supervisor, and Carl Gotro said, what's the deal with this, man? Um, Call these people. And I said, I'm not going to do it, Carl. And he said, well, what's the problem? And I said, because right now, I didn't go through the man's wallet. Look, he probably had his wallet on him, but I'm not going to go dig that wallet out of his pants, looking for his driver's license and flipping past pictures of his wife and kids.
Mhm.
That's something that I don't need to carry with me anymore. And I don't want to attach a face or a name. Heck, it wasn't even a face anymore. I don't want to attach a name and a face to what this person became. Uh, and I definitely don't want to go call his family and ask for demographic information. And
Mhm.
he said, I got you, fam. I'll make this go away. And, he got it. And they quit harassing me about that particular call. But that's sort of thing. Somebody has to bear witness, and sometimes I'm just not that somebody. I can't do it, and that's my sense of self-preservation kicking in. I can't add another stone to the graveyard.
Right. And so it gets hard over time because
Yeah,
we have burnout. I mean, we preach like to our newer providers, and I preach to myself, like, don't pick up so much overtime. You won't be burnt out. Okay, well, I don't pick up that much overtime and I'm still getting burnt out. And I think part
yeah,
of it is that it's that compassion fatigue. And I've talked about it, but
yeah.
like you hold this umbrella when you're working in healthcare. And it's not even just EMS, it's just in general. You hold this umbrella and you have the reign of all of the things in our control that happen to our patients. And then you have the things of higher management and system management and this, that, and the other, and the long hours and the little pay and not eating
Mhm.
for 6 hours. Hopefully my blood sugar doesn't drop too hard. And then
Yeah.
it gets heavy to hold. And then you start weighing on top of that, the little events that build up over time, and then the frequent flyers, and then this, that, and all these things you can't change, and it
Well,
gets hard to hold it.
and for profit EMS companies, we call them valued repeat customers,
Mm,
because they're the foundation of every successful business. If their
I
insurance pays, they're valued repeat customers.
I hate calling patients customers. That literally, like,
I know, I
I feel
know,
stomach acid building within me when I hear
I know.
that. But even even one part you talked about, like, you had felt that compassion as a mask, and you
Yeah,
know when this stuff happens, and like you already mentioned, it doesn't just happen one day. You don't just wake up and you're like, I'm burnt out. You have all these little signs along the way. And
yeah,
um where was the part where I put it? I'm sorry, my guy. So with all of that and the compassion fatigue and all that, it's also hard because, like, there was one shift that I had recently, and I've brought this up several times, but it's not the call. It wasn't the 1-year-old continuously seizing. It's that it was my nephew's first birthday. And so we had that call, and it was so early in the shift that, like, our company and our agency, even though, like, you may be in a shift, but if there's a call that's too much, or especially if it involves like a something traumatic to a pediatric or anything like that, you have the right to be like, hey, look, I gotta go home. I didn't do that. I called my supervisor and I explained what happened. He's like, "Oh yeah, if you need the," I was like, "No, dude, like, I'm good. Just give me 2 hours. Like, give me an hour of downtime. I just need
yeah,
an hour." And then I just kept thinking about it. And I kept looking at pictures of my nephew, and it made it so much worse. But me, myself, and I'm too tough. So I stayed on shift. And the next patient that we had it was just an abdominal pain. She had a stomach pain, but I was such a butthole to her because she said she had 8 out of 10 pain just sitting on a chair. And so I was like, oh, really? 8 out of 10? And my supervisor was on that call, and he looked at me, and I'm like, well, can you walk to the ambulance? And she's like, yeah. I was like, oh, it's really that bad. And it was so much. And I had my partner that had to look at me and be like, Alexis, you need to go home. And then I had a reality check and I'm like, good God, what is wrong with me?
Yeah.
Um, so like even little things like that, or over time, you go from you do your checklist every day, you do your inventory and you review your meds all the time to you show up, you open a cabinet, you check the O2. All right, we're good. So like it's always that progression. But um knowing where you are now and seeing being able to take that backwards perspective and not retrograde amnesia, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Um, looking back, like what was the thing that actually kept you going in EMS? And like today or like in the end of your career, like what prevents burnout for you? Because we I look at burnout like it's not an end all be all. Like you're not burnout, then you have to quit. Like we do go
Yeah.
through cycles of burnout. So what is the thing that kept you going?
Well, I used to joke and say that I work on an ambulance until I start to hate patients, and then I teach until I start to hate students, and then I go back to the ambulance, and I go back and forth like that. The problem is the last 10 years I had been teaching and working in the ambulance, and it just I was pretty bad, burnt out, and physically debilitated my last few months at Acadian. And my supervisor could tell I was pretty much phoning it in. I had a massive pulmonary embolus in April and neck surgery before November before that. So I had physically debilitated, gained a good bit of weight, and my arthritis was killing me, and I was just going through the motions. Um, and with no end in sight because I needed to change the pace, which is why I moved to upstate New York. But I think the thing that gave me the best perspective on it was after the Texas CMS conference, a friend of mine and I were going down 6th Street in Austin, hitting the bars. He decided he was going to educate my beer palate. So he just tried hot wings and craft brews at every bar we could find. And he said at one point, he said, Kelly, it's not our job to score touchdowns. I said, what I don't get it. What do you mean? He said, it's not our job to score touchdowns. We're the special teams of healthcare. And I said, okay, I'm lost. And he said, we're the special teams. And our job is to take a punt or a kickoff and move it as far up the field as we can. I said, are you saying that the ball is the patient? He said, yeah, exactly. We advance it as far as we can, and we put the offense in a position to score, but we don't really score the touchdowns. The offense does. And I said, okay. And the offense is, he said, well, that would be the emergency department. He said, we put the emergency department in a position to save the lives. He said, that's, scoring a touchdown is saving a life. We don't get a chance to do that very often. That's not our job. And I said, okay. He said, really? He said, it doesn't mean that what we do is unimportant. It just means that because you can't, you're not going to save any lives if the people taking care of the patient initially aren't doing their job. You're not going to win the Super Bowl if you have really bad special teams play and you fumble every kickoff or you get touchbacks all the time. He said you have to have good special teams play to win consistently. He said that's our job. He said occasionally, every now and then, we break loose a long run and we run it back 100 yards for a touchdown, and we can do our Snoopy dance and spike the ball and get our moment on national television, and that's it. But that's not the norm. And I said, screw you, man. I'm a game breaker. I'm a threat to score every time I touch the ball. But he had a great point. And if you go through your career thinking that your job is to score touchdowns and save lives, you're going to be one disappointed dude. Instead, you look like my job is to be a creative problem solver who always shows up when called. I think that's the honor, the compact in our profession that's appealed to me the most is no ambiguity. You call, we come. I'm going to be there when you need me. It may take me a while. We're going to do the best we can, but I will always respond. And that's powerfully appealing to me. But the you just you make a bad day a little bit better. Try to make a bad day better for whoever it is you're dealing with. And if you shift your focus to that, where you just try to make a bad day better and try to bring a little help and kindness to every patient, you have the opportunity to make an impact on every single call, rather than just waiting for the one where you can score your touchdown. And it makes a huge difference. And the other epiphany was when my daughter was born. She spent 63 days in the NICU at St. Francis Hospital in Monroe. Weighed 1 pound 14 ounces at birth. She had a grade 4 intracranial hemorrhage. And along about the point where the doctors quit saying might be developmentally delayed, might be blind, might have seizures, might have cerebral palsy, and started saying things like when the cerebral palsy develops and when she has the seizures and this kind of thing. It just got very scary. And a lady with an organization called Families Helping Families came and gave us and talked to us, and it's a network of people who are parents of special needs children, and they take us under their wing and show us how to cope. And she gave me an essay called "Welcome to Holland" by Emily Pearl Kingsley, and she likens in this essay, it's a very short read but a very poignant one, she likens having a child as taking your dream vacation to Italy. You got your books, you got your currency exchange, you got your itinerary all mapped out. You're going to eat at a sidewalk trattoria in Rome. You're going to see the Vatican and attend a papal mass. You're going to look at that gorgeous ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, take a gondola ride in Venice, drive through Tuscany and eat, and just experience Italy in all its glory. You're set. And then the plane lands and they fling open the doors and the stewardess says, "Welcome to Holland."
Oh man.
And you go,
Yeah.
well, no, I was supposed to go to Italy. My tickets are for Italy. She says, "Well, you landed in Holland and there's nothing you can do about that." And she said, "You can spend the rest of your life being bitter that you didn't go to Italy, or you can open your eyes and see the beauty of Holland and recognize that there's a lot of wonderful things about Holland. They have very nice people. They have windmills. They have daisies. They have or tulips. They have a world-class collection of Rembrandts. So you can spend your life being bitter about what EMS was promised to be, or you can open your eyes and start embracing what it is. And it is a pretty damn cool job. So I just, I saw the parallels in my career. So I kind of shifted my focus about what I can take from every call. It didn't stop burnout, but it gives you the perspective to go like, you know what, I need to go back and reconnect with the things that are, and start focusing on the things that are important instead of all the things that are wrong. I need to quit sticking pins in the voodoo doll of my dispatcher and and quit griping about my supervisor or whatever, and get away from this for a little while, because and learn that remember that my patients and my partners are what make this job worthwhile. So that's what
And
helped.
yeah, and 100%, like, if we're honest, this job sucks sometimes, and it's
Yes,
it,
it does. It
it's
does.
not just like the blood and guts and gore and these tragic calls, but it's literally just like, oh my God, I've gotten off late for the 5th shift in a row, or
Uh-huh.
man, we're sent to BFE and we get off in 2 hours. It's not even just
Yeah.
that, just so much other stuff. But I mean, kind of in that realm, like no matter how long you're in EMS, whether it's a short time or you make a whole career out of it, I mean, it's cheesy, but it gets intertwined into your DNA, and like it changes, and it changes us. And no matter how much good we see or how much bad, how much tragedy we're sucked into on these calls, or how many
Yeah.
Meemaw's hands that we hold. And for me, like I always ask them, like, were you ever married? How long were you married? And we go on that, and I'm like, what's the secret sauce to a good marriage? Or I go on another tangent. I'm like, you know what? Men are trash. Good for you. Whatever it is. It's which not all men are trash, but in that moment, all men are trash, and it's great.
Yeah.
But there's always a way to find that silver lining of this job. And kind of my last little point of the en route book, you were working with a partner, and it was Christmas Eve, right before it was about to hit Christmas,
Hmm.
and he asked you, like, how do you deal with the constant dumb things that people are doing? Because dumb things are why we keep, natural selection is, it's why we have a job. And you had told him, you said, those big tough paramedics who don't let anything bother them. They never last, or they stick around, but nobody wants to work with them. They never cry, but they forget how to smile too. And you say, keep looking for the good stuff. You can always find something good if you just take
Yeah.
the time to look. And that's that thing of like, when I start getting negative and it starts rubbing off on my partner, or maybe she's getting negative and it's rubbing off on me, I always wait for that next call, that like I'll look at her and I'll connect with the patient. I'm like, man, like this is why I stay in the job. Or she'll connect with a patient for whatever reason. She's like, this was my favorite patient in so long. And I'm like, why? But it's we always look for at least one patient per shift that like we'll tell them to
Hmm.
their face, like, I wish you could just ride with us for the rest of the day. Like, what if we put you
Yeah.
in the middle of the ambulance? But so I don't know, a big part from of the book is like from when you start, and
Hmm.
then you kind of feel that burnout playing, and then my favorite part, you get Shelly, that EMT that you're trying to just get breakfast in the drive through, and then you get that call and she's all excited about it. And when I first started with my partner,
And that guy was a valued repeat customer too, you know. And
always.
that was a service where the paramedic always rode in the back and the EMT always
Uh-huh.
drove. And at the end of that
Uh-huh.
call, I was like, you know what? You formed a really good rapport with him. Can I trust you to take care of him in the back while I get up front and drive? You let me do that. You bet I
Yes.
will.
Have it.
Yes, yes. I think you've earned this. As a matter of fact, I'll let you write the report and I'll just sign it.
Dude, I had one of those moments because when me and my partner first started working together, um, I don't want to say a broker of this habit, but like, dude, I just started at the company I work at now. And so I'm already like having to get used to new protocols. And
Yeah,
we work, 12-hour shifts versus my 24s, but we packed like a 48-hour shift of where I used to work into a 12-hour shift.
yeah,
And it's hot outside. So I'm like dying. And then we get a call for a cardiac arrest. And she was like, oh, yeah. And like she turned the lights on, and I was like, oh, God, oh, God. And so, like, I try to get in the spirit. I'm like, all right, this is what we're going to do. We're pre gaming, all this stuff. And then after, I worked on that report for like a hot minute. And the next shift, I was like, I haven't submitted that ticket yet. I said, you want to see this chart? She's like, yeah. And so I showed it to her. I said, you want to see all the events that I had to log? And I showed it to her. And I'm like, sis, I love the enthusiasm. I also want to do cool things. I said, but sometimes it's not worth it. And so now, like,
yeah,
I mean, we still like we get stoked on the way to calls if it's
yeah,
like our last good one, like, I mean, not good one, sorry for the patient, but our last GSW, like I'm playing the YMCA on the way to it, and like we're getting
yeah,
amped up. It's still there, But the reality of some things of, yes, it's a cardiac
Yeah,
arrest. We get to do all the things, but somebody's got to write the report,
yeah.
sis. Yes, I want to get
That's
canceled.
yeah. That's why it's always best to be the second medic in on the scene. If we just if we can work it out that you roll up and go 1097 30 seconds after the first one did, great. I get to
Gosh,
do all the
golly.
cool stuff and he has to write the report. She has to write the report. That's great. After my PE and I came back from my pulmonary embolus, I was dreading a physically taxing call because I could still, I could walk 20 feet and be out of breath. And I hit it well, but I was pretty physically debilitated. And wouldn't you know it, 2 days into my
Mm.
second shift back, I worked cardiac arrest of a lady that had a pulmonary embolus,
Oh,
you know.
oh no.
So I get there and I get my partner on the airway. I get two cops doing CPR. I get an IO in the patient or an IV in the patient. I push the first round of drugs. I shock. And my supervisor rolled up on the scene and he comes in. I just handed him the monitor and set it down on his side. And I'm running the code, standing at the foot, and I'm running the code, coordinating everything, and looked around. I was like, you know what? I'll she had a recliner rocker in the living room. So I just turned the recliner rocker around and sat down in the rocking chair and just ran the code. And 30 minutes in, my supervisor looks up and goes, "How the hell did this happen?" And I said, "Man, Acadian doesn't pay me for what I do with these. It pay me for what I do with this. You
Right.
don't have to work hard if you learn how to work smart." And he said, "Okay, well, I'll note that because I've never seen someone run a code from a rocking chair before." And I said, "Hey, man,
I mean,
did
if
it
it's
run
efficient,
well?
you're still doing your job. Shoot.
That's it. That's it." So I'm the stand back, big picture, non-interventional, direct the work of others paramedic.
I know a podcast that they talk about the curse of the 4-year medic, where as soon as you hit your 4th year, like you start kind of slacking off all that stuff. And so you get that moment where it's like, oh man, like I gotta get it together. But they bring up that the more experience a provider has, the farther they stand away from a patient. And they talked about like, you have your 10-year providers who are in the doorway, literally. And it's so accurate. But no, dude, so the en route book, it's good. And then
Thank you.
I read the perspectives, and I've only gotten through volume 1. Sorry, I'm a huge fan, but I've gotten through volume 1.
Check out volume 2 because those guys need some love. That's one of the projects it has sold the least, but it sold a lot, but they don't get a lot because you're splitting royalties 15, 20
Right.
ways on one book. Uh, but they knocked it out of the park. These are nurses and doctors and paramedics and cops who are not writers. And I had to do very little structural editing on that. I just said, look, here's the idea. We've all run these kind of calls, even though we obviously didn't run the same patient. The patient is the vehicle to tell the story. So how did this kind of call affect you? I'm sure you can think of one that was similar and what it do to you. And they said, okay, we can do that. So I paired them up 3 at a time and said, y'all get together and decide what call you're going to write about. And they, knocked it out of the park. These guys, you wouldn't think that they're not professional writers. They did what Hemingway said is the essence of good writing: just sit at the typewriter and bleed. And that's what they did, and did a great job of it. I wish we could sell 1 billion of them and they could all afford their own Mercedes from the royalties, because they deserve it. They really did a great job.
And it's such a creative and like what's the word, original, I guess, way of
Yeah,
looking at like not just your autobiographical experience of
yeah,
EMS, but you have in one part, it's one call, but it's the perspective from the police officer and then the medic and then the ER nurse. And then you have your one of it's a hospice patient with the DNR. And so it's from the medics and then the hospice nurse and then the ER doc that has to be called. And so it's like you see all angles of,
Yeah.
like you talked about the vehicle of the patient, like you see it from all angles, and dude, it's good. And I'm not just
Yeah.
saying it because you're here. I tell people and they're like, what's some
These,
good EMS
these,
books? I'm like, this one, look at it, whole picture of this call. Look at
these,
it, whole
yeah,
picture.
these started as a collaborative writing experiment on my blog 15 years ago. And they went viral before viral was a word. I shared thousands of times and 500,000 page views over both of those, over the two original perspective stories. And it always meant to write more of them, but I couldn't find enough collaborators. And then along comes social media, and I've got a fairly broad network. And I said, you know what, it's time to take this off the back burner. Who would like to join in with me? And these guys stepped up to the plate and did a great job. But the originals were me and Matt Guest and Ian McMurtry and my girlfriend at the time, Barbara Jackson. And we did the story of Miss Helen Schenk, the patient who, well, I won't give it away,
No.
and the story of the teenagers and drunken driving. And man, that thing, I got Instapundit reviews and hundreds and hundreds of comments on my blog about that, and it was just the coolest thing before when blogging was still a new thing to do, and I'm glad I got to bring it to life in a book. We're going to write a third one. We're going to write a third one that's going to be happy stories and uplifting stories, because perspectives can be pretty dark. The problem is finding enough stories. I wanted, kind of like chicken soup for the paramedic soul kind of stories, the ones that make you feel good. But you can't write an entire book of 10 different calls delivering a baby, because everybody's like, oh, I got a great story where I got to deliver a baby. Yeah, I know. I got a dozen of those, and I'm sorry, that's great. We'll pick the best one, but we need 10. We need about 9 more of something other than
Anything
delivering
else.
a baby.
Yeah. I don't want to say that too much, because if you say it 3 times, it happens on your next shift. And
delivering a baby.
Bro, if it happens, I'm calling you. No. But no, it's good stuff. And your en route book, I mean, you talk about so much, including one of the stories of the other ways you can give oral glucose to the patient that's altered, stuff like that.
Yeah, honey buns. Thank God for glucagon. Never had to do the honey bun since. Thank God for glucagon.
And then the impacts from your perspectives, volume 1 and volume 2. I have skimmed through volume 2. I have it. I just life is busy, but good stuff. And on my final note, now that you have all this experience, you have your nationally recognized 30 years from National Register of EMT, which is not a small feat. Congratulations. What's your vision of where you feel like EMS is headed to? Because things have changed drastically from, I'm not calling anybody out, from mask pants and everybody needs a spine board to where we are today. And we're not hyperventilating every single head injury and all this stuff, et cetera, et cetera. No more GCS listening to debate. Thank you. Where do you not calling you out, but
I think we're moving forward. And the thing is, when you're in the middle of it, you don't see the progress we're making. It's only when you have years of experience in the field and you look back and you realize how different the profession was back then than it is now. Yeah, we're busier now and we're more overworked and the system itself is more stressed, but the care we provide is clinically so much more sophisticated than it used to be. And we're starting to talk about bigger and broader things rather than just the 15 minutes it takes to get a patient from the living room to the ER. We're growing as a profession and we're getting more mature and starting to think about things that grown-ups think about instead of just squabbling with our siblings in nursing and
Mhm.
that sort of thing. So I I don't know what the paramedic of the future will be. I think that unless we stop believing our press clippings and stop eating our own young, that the future of EMS is not going to be determined by people in EMS, and that's a shame. Uh, but I think there's growing groundswell of advocates out there who are saying the right things about our education and our clinical sophistication and where we fit in the overall picture and evidence-based medicine and that sort of thing. I think that the paramedic of 10 years from now will be by and large college educated, will possess at least an associate degree, if not a baccalaureate, and our college our education will be college based degree programs. We may do less skills than we do now, but they'll be broader. It won't be so narrow a focus. Um, but at least that's what I hope. I hope that I can continue to grow, and when I'm along with the profession and get to do cool things, and meet cool people. Uh, so I'm kind of cautiously hopeful. Uh, we're our own worst enemy sometimes with the whole ET3 thing with emergency treatment triage and transport. The which was the community paramedicine funding model that Medicare was experimenting with.
Hmm.
Uh, we had an opportunity to take that and transform the way EMS was provided and go from fee for transport, which we do now, and as far as regulators and reimbursers are concerned, the medical care we give is incidental. We're just a very expensive, fairly sophisticated taxi
Mhm.
to fee for service. So we could be gatekeepers of the system and provide sophisticated medical care and incidentally transport people to the hospital if they need it. That's where we need to go. And we lost our opportunity to do that. They gave us a golden opportunity and
Mhm.
they quit because EMS profession is too damn lazy to submit the damn data.
Right.
We like griping more than we like doing the work. We
Mhm.
like cool toys and tools more than we like education on how to use them. Man, give me a toy or a gadget every time, and not don't bother me with education that says those two toys and gadgets are not necessary.
Yeah.
We're our own worst enemy sometimes, but there's more and more people realizing that, and I think we're kind of growing up. I hope so.
Mm, absolutely. I'm not going to get in a tangent of why community paramedicine is fantastic because it's not at my agency, and by the time it probably comes around, I'll be phasing out of EMS. But um, yeah, it's I feel like we've come a long way, but we still have so far to go. And I mean
Yeah,
it should be nothing but encouraging because there's still so many advancements to make. It's a great time to be in EMS, long story short. Great
yeah,
time to be here. But
yeah. It's a brave new world.
a scary one sometimes. But
Yeah,
also rewarding.
yeah.
But yeah, Kelly,
Thanks.
that's all I got. Thank you so much for
Thanks for having me on.
oh, dude, it was an honor. Um, yeah, so if that's all you got, that's all I got. And as I end every episode, so with that.
The 22 at the Lips podcast is designed to support, not replace, the relationship that exists between a practitioner and his or her medical director. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host, guest, and not necessarily of Master Medics. The information provided during this podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for your approved protocols.